Hello, my name is Tristan Jeong, and I read the book Immunity to Change by Dr. Robert Keegan and Lisa Lasko-Leahy. So I want to introduce you to the authors. First off is Dr. Robert Keegan. He's the professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education. He received his PhD from Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and he received awards such as honorary doctorates from Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology and Marywood University. The second author, the co-author, is Dr. Lisa Lasko-Leahy. She is the Associate Director of the Change Leadership Group. She co-founded and is the co-director of Minds at Work with Dr. Robert Keegan, and she received her doctorates in education from Harvard University. So the objectives of this presentation is to know the difference between technical challenge and adaptive challenge, and I will cover that in further details later in the slides. And we will also examine the anecdotes in the book to see how development of mindset can be achieved and how we can move on to more complex mindset. And we will also apply the learnings to our lives and contemplate on how we can develop our mindset. So a brief overview of the book. There are three problems that led Dr. Keegan and Dr. Leahy to write this book. The first problem is the disjunction or no correlation between increased understanding of the need for change versus the lack of understanding as to what prevents the needs for the change. Now, the second problem is the people being skeptical or people's skepticism of possibility of change. And the third problem is all the learning and reflecting from our previous experiences will not change us inherently as people because they will occur within our existing mindsets if we do not change our mindsets. Now, there are three parts to this book. We will reconceive or think in a new way to understand change, and we will examine the anecdotes and understand the value of Dr. Keegan and Dr. Leahy's approach for individuals and organizations to develop their mindsets and develop their mental complexities. And we will attempt to approach for ourselves. Now, we will rethink the challenge of change. Now, the book outlines the criteria for successful leaders as leaders who ask themselves, what can I do to make my setting the most fertile ground in the world for the growth of talent? To reword that in a simpler term, I would want to ask myself, how can I develop an environment that fosters growth and development for my employees? The book defines the growth coming from new opportunities or facing new challenges, and successful leaders know what makes growth more possible, how to foster growth, and what prevents growth. Now, we misunderstand change as a need to better deal or cope with the greater complexity of the world. And the book defines coping and dealing but to adding new skills or widening our repertoire of responses. We learn new skills. We can learn new skills down in our career, but we don't have to necessarily develop by learning new skills. So the book comes up with a concept called adaptive challenge, and the adaptive challenge can only be met by transforming our mindset and advancing to a more sophisticated stage of mental development. In other words, we need to change as a person to perform better and perform in the bigger picture. So this is different from technical challenge, which can be solved by adding a new skill. For example, a pilot can learn how to land an airplane in difficult circumstances, or a surgeon can learn how to perform new surgeries. But that does not mean the pilot or the surgeon developed as a person and developed as a worker. Adaptive challenge requires adaptive formulation of problem. And to solve those problems, we need to come up with an adaptive solution because we cannot solve adaptive challenges by a technical solution. So the book comes up with an anecdote coming from the leadership team of a school district in Southern California. So the school district had 80% Latino student body, and majority of those students had families in poverty. They needed financial assistance. They weren't used to speaking English in school settings. The leadership team came from a different socioeconomic status. They were 80% white, and they did not see eye to eye. And they did not hold high expectations for its Latino students. And by Latino students, I mean the whole body of students. The leadership team inherently feared that the students would not succeed if they were pushed to their limits. And if they were pushed to their limits, then the leadership team feared that they would feel personally defeated due to leading them to failure, quote unquote, by pushing them to their limits. So this is the map of leadership team's mindset that comes directly from the book. So they were committed collectively to accelerate the rate of academic achievement for the English language learners, which I will refer to as ELLs for convenience sake. Now, they were not holding the expectations, or they were not holding high enough expectations for the ELLs. And they wanted to protect their students from failure, but they by not being too demanding. So they wanted them to have an easier curriculum so that they would have an environment that they would succeed on paper, but not necessarily as a student or as a future developing workforce. They were assuming themselves that they would lead the students to failure if they push the students way too much. And they fear that they would feel terrible and that they would feel personally defeated because they led them to failure by being too demanding. Now, the solution to the immunity to change in organizations originally stemmed from solving the immunity to change in individuals. And I will cover that later in latter slides. Solving the immunity to change, however, is vulnerable to conflicts within the group. All the group members can be complacent in their way of lives and the way of how they work. Change is a very difficult process, and they are vulnerable to conflicts. Now, I will cover the immunity to change in individuals, and this book covers the story of David, who was one of the rising talents in a prominent worldwide engineering company. He was promoted to a senior management position, but he really didn't have any success with delegating. David, by appearance, was in a good situation. He was excited to be promoted to his senior management position, and people were pleased to work with him. He was respected by the people who work with him. But at the same time, David was overwhelmed with the workload and had problem asking for help. So this is the map of David's mindset. So he wanted to have a commitment, or he had aspirations to be better at delegating, to clarify outcomes desired, to accept different approaches. He didn't want to fear small failures, and he wanted to take them as learning. But he let new opportunities distract him. He was accepting more tasks and sacrificing his life outside work. And he was not being adept in time management. So when he said, "I am committed to being independent and capable of anything," that had a hidden meaning of saying, "I fear missing a good opportunity, failing behind." So he had assumptions of if he's being too dependent on others, and if he's not doing the work by himself, then he will lose the respect. How David overcame his challenge was 2 steps. He identified his identity. So he identified himself as a doer and not a delegator. He realized that his benefits in his workplace came from feeling important and valuable by doing the tasks that were assigned himself. So he was conflicting between the need to delegate to the need to ask people for help versus not being able to do so. So he created a bigger frame for himself. He developed mentally as a worker with keeping delegating consistent with his self-identification. So he moved from being a tradesman to an architect and a developer. So what I mean by that is he was being a tradesman by doing all the work by himself. He was very adept in his work, and he was very adept in doing the little tasks that were assigned to him. But by being an architect, now he is able to see himself in a larger picture, and he's able to see the organization in the bigger picture, and he is able to see how the employees can grow under him. He sees developing and designing and organizing the work as the right work now. And that's what I mean by being an architect and a developer. He develops his employees while developing his mindset on his own. And he is able to design and execute delegations and seeing the larger picture in the organization. So why is this important in our lives? Well, this is important because we live in a world that is rapidly changing. For example, what I mean by technically changing, I could give this presentation face-to-face a few years ago with a laser pointer and a PowerPoint presentation, but now I'm giving a presentation on Zoom, and the change is occurring technically in the world, but the world is also challenging our mental complexities as it is getting bigger and as it is adding more aspects in the world itself. And the more time and the more experience we build in our fields and our career, we may be more adept, we may technically develop, but that also leaves us vulnerable to immunity to change. And we, like I said, we may develop new skills, we may learn new experiences, but we may not change as a person, we may not change as a worker. So adaptive challenges and solutions are really important to developing our mental complexities. In this rapidly changing world, we need to develop our mental complexities, and we need to change our mindset so that we can adapt to this rapidly changing world. We need to see the things in the bigger picture and not only looking at the details. So as we move higher up in the hierarchies, and as we move further down in our career, and we're going to have more responsibilities, we're going to have people under us working for us and the whole organization. And by that happening, we will need to see the things in the bigger picture. We will need more complex mindset. We will need to be good at the job that we do. And on top of that, we need to develop an environment that fosters growth for our employees at the same time. So I want you to discuss with your group members 3 questions. What is a principle that you have been holding on to in your life? And the second is, how did that principle prevent you from developing your mindset? And the final question is, how can you change adaptively with including your own principle? So for mine, for example, would be, I would be a very detail-oriented person. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, but it prevented me from seeing a bigger picture. And it prevented me from being an architect and a designer, just like David. So I was not good at developing. I was not good at designing. I was not good at executing plans. But I know I could change, and I am starting to change, because as I'm taking more leadership positions and as I am trying to see myself in the bigger picture, I am changing adaptively to become a leader and to become a successful leader that fosters growth for my employees. So that is the end of my slideshow. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I want every one of you to have a great night. Thank you.